I was smoothing down my daughter's curls when I realized there was nothing for her on the table. No card. No wrapped gift. Just a row of sparkling boxes, each one labeled with the names of my nieces and nephews. My mother-in-law raised her glass and said, "Some children earn their moments." I smiled so my daughter wouldn't see my throat tightening. But she noticed. And so did my husband, who stood quietly by the door, one hand behind his back. I thought he was going to walk away again. But instead, he stepped forward. He stepped forward, but not toward me. He walked past the long table where all the children were seated, chatting and laughing with frosting on their fingers and glitter on their cheeks. He passed our daughter like she wasn't even sitting there, her tiny back straight, her hands folded in her lap. He moved toward his sister, who was snapping photos of her twin boys unwrapping matching tablets. "Thanks for helping organize this," he said to her, handing her the bottle of imported wine he'd hidden behind his back. She giggled, accepted it like it was expected, and kissed him on the cheek. My daughter turned to me slowly, her lips pressed together in a tight little line. I could see the question in her eyes. Why wasn't she celebrated, too? The dining room buzzed with warmth that didn't reach our corner. Everyone had found their seats. Everyone except us. I checked the long table again, scanning for place cards. The ones near the center had names written in gold foil: Grandpa Joe, Aunt Lisa, Cousin Ivy. Further down, the names got smaller, handwritten in pen. And at the very end, tucked between the utility cart and the kitchen entry, was a folding chair with a paper plate and a plastic fork. The card read, "Family Help." My breath caught in my throat. My husband said nothing as he slipped into the seat next to his sister, already refilling her wine glass. My daughter's hand found mine under the table. "Do we sit here, Mommy?" she whispered. I nodded, because what else could I do? It wasn't the first time. As I guided her to our seats near the kitchen, the smell of roasting potatoes and cinnamon glaze filled the air. It was the kind of scent that was supposed to smell like comfort. It didn't. My chair wobbled. My daughter's feet didn't reach the floor. I took a deep breath and looked out at the table I had spent all morning decorating. I had polished the silver. I had arranged the centerpieces. I had baked the pies, including the one my mother-in-law now declared a bit too tangy, but at least homemade. My daughter didn't reach for her plate. She looked at the gift pile again. All wrapped, all glittery, all clearly not for her. I folded my napkin 3 times before setting it in my lap. Across the room, my sister-in-law raised her voice and called out, "Did you forget to bring the cranberry sauce? Oh, that's right. You were supervising today." Everyone laughed. My husband smiled but looked down into his drink. I could have ignored it. I usually did. But this time, my daughter was watching. Her eyes flicked from face to face, trying to understand the joke. I leaned over and whispered in her ear, "They just don't know how special you are." She didn't say anything, but she blinked quickly and looked away. She's 7. She shouldn't know what that kind of silence means. When dessert was brought out, her name still hadn't been called. Not once. Not for a present. Not for a thank you. Not even to say hello. When the plates of pumpkin pie started making their way down the table, my daughter reached up and tapped her father's sleeve gently. He looked down at her, startled like he'd forgotten she existed. "Daddy," she said, soft and hopeful. "Did you bring anything for me?" He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at his mother, then at me. "You know, honey," he said finally, "this year was about the other kids. You've got plenty already." She nodded like a good girl. I watched something in her expression fold and hide. That's when I saw it, our son. My oldest. He wasn't at the table. He hadn't been there all evening, now that I thought about it. A chill ran up my spine. He had texted me that morning saying he might be late. He was in his 2nd year of law school and had warned us about final exams. I hadn't expected him to make it. But just then, the door opened. And he walked in, not wearing his usual hoodie or backpack, but a navy blazer. Behind him was a tall man in a dark overcoat holding a black briefcase. The laughter at the table died off, replaced by murmurs. My son didn't look at anyone but me. Then he walked straight toward our table. My daughter turned to him with wide eyes. He knelt down, whispered something in her ear, and handed her a small white envelope. She held it carefully like it might break. "What is it?" I asked, my voice low. My son glanced around the table, then looked at his sister. "It's her invitation," he said. "To the real table." He stood up slowly, taller than I remembered, and turned toward the center of the room. "Excuse me," he said, loud enough to stop even my mother-in-law mid-sip. "I need a moment of your time. This won't take long. You'll want to hear it." The man behind him stepped forward, opened the briefcase, and pulled out a thick folder. He flipped it open and handed my son a single sheet. My husband rose halfway from his chair. "What is this?" he asked, already frowning. My son's voice was calm, but every word hit like ice. "It's a formal statement. We're not suing. Yet. This is something else entirely." He paused, and in that pause, I felt something settle inside me. The room stilled. Every eye on him. Every heartbeat loud. Then my son looked straight at my husband. "Before I read it, are you sure you want to be sitting next to her?" The room turned colder. My sister-in-law narrowed her eyes. My mother-in-law opened her mouth, but for once had nothing to say. My daughter clutched the envelope in her lap, her little fingers curled tight around its edges. I reached for her hand and squeezed it once. My son's voice was steady, unshaken, rehearsed. And I realized in that moment, he wasn't just here for his sister. He was here for me too. And what he was about to say was going to break the silence we'd all been pretending didn't exist. When I was younger, I believed that being kind would earn you a place at the table. Not just any table, the table where people saw you, listened to you, called you by name like it meant something. For years I tried. I showed up early, stayed late, brought food, held crying babies, cleaned up after everyone. I ironed napkins for birthdays no one remembered I attended. I was never the center, never even the corner. Just part of the setup, the shadow behind the celebration. And I told myself that was enough, because I had my children. I thought that if they saw me do everything with love, they'd grow up believing that love was worth something. But even children notice when their mother disappears into the wallpaper. And mine did. It wasn't just this Thanksgiving. It had been building, in quiet, steady ways. Years of being mistaken for the hired help by distant cousins. Years of being the one who took the group photos without ever being asked to join in. Years of hearing, "Oh, you're still with him? You're stronger than I'd be," followed by pity smiles as if they hadn't watched me carry this family's holidays for over a decade. I stayed silent not because I didn't see it, but because I thought silence was the price of peace. I thought maybe one day they'd realize. That one day, my daughter wouldn't have to sit on a plastic chair next to a utility cart and pretend she didn't notice the glittering gifts had skipped her name. 2 weeks before this dinner, I had cried in the laundry room. Not from anything big. Just a group photo. My husband's family had gone out to lunch and posted the pictures online. His sisters, his cousins, his mother. All their children. Everyone tagged but me. My daughter had seen it and asked, "Why weren't we there?" I didn't know how to answer. I was folding socks and couldn't find a matching pair. I told her they probably forgot. She looked at me for a long time, then said, "But you always remember them." That night, when I thought everyone was asleep, I sat on the edge of my bed and cried. I didn't hear the door creak. Didn't know my son had been watching. He sat beside me and asked, "Why do you let them do this to you?" I couldn't answer that either. Maybe because I was afraid of what would happen if I stopped. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he stood and said, "Mom, if you ever want to stop pretending, I'll be ready." I didn't know what he meant. I just nodded, wiped my eyes, and told him good night. He hugged me a little longer than usual. The next morning, He texted me from school. Just a simple message. What time is dinner? Also, formal or casual? I assumed he wouldn't come. I assumed a lot of things. My son has always been the quiet type. Observant. The kind of boy who watches the room before speaking. When he was little, he used to draw what he called truth pictures. Scenes from his day, drawn with crayon, with captions like, "Grandma said I was loud but then laughed at Cousin Ben." I saved every one. I think he always saw more than I wanted him to. Especially when it came to how his father treated me. Especially when it came to how that behavior was mirrored by the rest of the family. I used to think it was my job to protect my kids from family drama. To keep the peace, hold my tongue, be the buffer between tradition and dignity. But as my son grew older, I realized he wasn't learning patience. He was learning silence. And my daughter. She was learning invisibility. That Thanksgiving, when I saw her scan the gift table, pretending not to look disappointed, I realized I wasn't shielding them from anything. I was showing them how to disappear with grace. Back at the table, after my son re-entered the room with the man in the overcoat, you could feel the tension sink like a storm cloud into every corner of that house. I watched my husband freeze mid-bite, watched his sister smirk in that tight, superior way she always did. "A lawyer," she said under her breath, nudging her husband. "What's next?" "A protest sign." I didn't react. I was watching my daughter. Her hands were still in her lap, holding the envelope like it was made of glass. She looked up at me once, and I gave her the smallest nod I could manage. My son didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He stepped to the end of the table, held the page in one hand, and looked around. "Before I read this," he said, "I'd like to ask a question. Who here thinks my sister deserved to be left out?" Dead silence. Chairs creaked. Someone cleared their throat. His voice didn't waver. No gift. No seat. Not a single name tag. But plenty of room for people who only show up when it's convenient. My mother-in-law scoffed and said, "That's not fair, she's a child. She doesn't need all that." My son blinked once. "You're right. She doesn't need a gift. But you wanted to send a message. And she got it loud and clear." My daughter's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. She was watching her brother like he was a lighthouse, and she had been lost at sea for a long, long time. My husband finally stood. "That's enough," he said, but there was no weight in his voice. No authority. No defense. Just embarrassment. The man in the coat handed my son a second envelope. He set it down in front of my husband without a word. I could see the color drain from his face as he read the heading. His mother leaned over, trying to see. He pulled it away from her. My sister-in-law snapped. "What is it?" He didn't answer. My son folded his arms. "It's not a lawsuit. Not yet. But it is a formal statement of boundary and separation. Legally drawn. Financially reviewed. And emotionally final." I didn't even know what that meant. Not fully. But my husband did. So did my in-laws. Everyone sat frozen. Forks in midair. Eyes locked on paper, on my son, on me. My husband looked at me like he was seeing me clearly for the first time in years. And maybe he was. Because for once, I didn't look away. And that's when my daughter finally spoke. Her voice was soft, but it carried. She looked up at her father and said, "Does this mean we don't have to come here anymore?" His jaw tightened. He didn't answer. But I did. I smiled at her and said, "Not if you don't want to." She smiled back. And that's when the envelope she was holding slipped open just enough for the card to peek out. It wasn't a name tag. It was something else entirely. Something handwritten in my son's careful print. A title. I didn't get to read the rest because at that moment, my sister-in-law stood and said, "This is insane. You can't just throw ultimatums at a family table." My son looked at her. "No. You threw the first one when you labeled my mother, family help." This is just our reply. And then, without a single raised voice or slammed fist, the room cracked wide open. The paper in my husband's hands trembled slightly, though he tried to keep his expression flat. But I could see it, the twitch in his jaw, the way his thumb rubbed the edge of the document like he was trying to erase it. No one at the table said a word. Not even his mother, who usually filled every silence with criticism or commentary disguised as sweet concern. My son didn't move. He stood calm, unreadable, as if the truth he had just laid bare wasn't heavy at all. The lawyer behind him didn't speak either. He didn't have to. His presence said enough. And then my daughter, small and impossibly brave, held up the envelope she'd been clutching and opened it with care. She pulled out a single card. It wasn't glossy or gold-edged like the others on the table. Just a simple cream-colored rectangle with a message handwritten in neat black ink. She read it aloud, her voice quiet but clear. To my sister, who deserved a seat at the real table long before today. You are not forgotten. You are not invisible. You are loved, officially. There was a beat of silence, then she added, almost like a question. It's signed, your brother. She looked at him, eyes wide with surprise and something warmer. For the first time that day, she smiled. It was the kind of smile that cracks a room in half. You could feel it. The weight of it. The way it made every perfectly coordinated centerpiece look meaningless. The way it made the glitter-wrapped gifts seem cheap. One by one, the cousins who had been giggling and unwrapping tablets and video games slowly turned toward her. A few shifted in their seats. One of the younger girls looked down at her own unopened box like it had turned to stone. My mother-in-law broke the silence first, her tone sharp and shaky. This is ridiculous. It's just a holiday. You're turning it into a courtroom. My son turned to her slowly. It stopped being about the holiday the moment you decided my mother and sister didn't matter. Her eyes narrowed. You're disrespecting your elders. He tilted his head slightly. Respect is a two-way contract. And frankly, none of you have held up your side of it. His voice never rose. That was the part that made it land harder. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't angry. He was just done pretending it was normal. My husband set the document down as though it had burned him. So what now? He asked, not looking at me. You're cutting us off? I didn't respond. My son did. No. She's stepping back. She's allowed to do that. She gave more than enough for years. And I think it's time she gets to choose who sits at her table. He looked down at me, then offered his hand. It was a small gesture, but one that felt like the world shifted a few degrees. I placed my hand in his and stood. The scraping of my chair against the floor echoed in the stunned quiet. My daughter got up too, still holding the card. She clutched it to her chest like it was armor. We stood together, and for a long moment, no one moved. Then the lawyer, still silent, reached into the briefcase again and pulled out a second folder. He placed it gently next to the first document on the table. This one is just for information, he said, glancing toward my husband. But I'd advise reading it carefully. My husband finally looked at me then. Really looked. There was fear in his eyes, but also something else. Recognition. Maybe even regret. But it came too late, like a match struck after the rain. I nodded once, and then turned away. As we walked past the table, my sister-in-law hissed under her breath, "You're tearing the family apart." My son didn't even turn his head. "No. You did that years ago. We're just finally calling it what it is." My daughter reached for my hand and squeezed. The guests stayed seated, stunned and motionless. The air in the room had changed. It wasn't dramatic. No plates were flipped. No screaming match broke out. It was quieter than that. It was the sound of power-shifting hands. Just as we reached the door, a voice called out. One of the cousins. Ivy. 17, smart, always watching. "Auntie," she said. "I didn't know it was this bad." I paused and turned around. She looked small suddenly, like she'd realized the glitter on her wrapping paper wasn't real gold. "I'm sorry," she added. I nodded, but didn't say anything. I wasn't looking for apologies. Not today. Maybe not ever again. Outside, the cold air was sharp and clear. My son held the door open for us. My daughter looked up at the sky and whispered, "It smells like snow." I wrapped my arm around her shoulder. "Maybe it'll fall tonight," I said. She smiled. My son closed the door behind us. We walked down the driveway in silence. We were almost to the car when we heard it, the front door opening again. A figure stepped out, coat in hand. I turned to see who it was. It wasn't my husband. It wasn't his mother. It was my niece, Ivy. She jogged a few steps to catch up. "Can I come with you?" she asked, a little out of breath. "Not forever. Just for now. I don't want to sit at that table anymore." My daughter looked up at her and nodded, like this made perfect sense. And so we made room for one more. We got into the car, the four of us, and drove off into the dusk. Behind us, the house sat glowing with lights and noise, but for the first time, none of it mattered. My seat wasn't at that table anymore. I had a new one now. And it was just beginning to feel like home. The drive home was quiet, but it wasn't heavy. The silence felt different this time, like space had opened where something used to press down. My daughter leaned against my shoulder in the back seat, still clutching the card her brother gave her. My son drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting lightly on the console. Ivy sat in the passenger seat, hands folded in her lap, eyes forward but far away. No one had to say anything. The statement had already been made. And for once, I didn't feel the need to explain myself to anyone. Not to my husband. Not to his mother. Not even to the part of me that used to flinch when things got uncomfortable and called it keeping the peace. That part had finally gone quiet. We didn't go straight home. My son pulled into the parking lot of a small cafe on the edge of town. It was warm inside, softly lit, mostly empty. We sat by the window. The waitress brought us hot chocolate without asking. Maybe she could tell we needed comfort, or maybe she just recognized something in the way we walked in. Tired, but a little lighter than we should be. My daughter smiled at her and thanked her twice. Ivy ordered tea but didn't touch it. She just stared at the steam rising and whispered, "I thought I knew what family meant." I reached across the table and rested my hand over hers. "You still can," I said. "You just get to choose now." For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about who might be upset with me. I wasn't listing all the things I'd have to fix later to smooth it over. I wasn't trying to predict the fallout. I was just there, sitting across from my children, watching my daughter stir marshmallows into her cup like it was the best part of her day. And maybe it was. Maybe that moment was enough to start rebuilding something better. Not perfect, but true. When we got home, I tucked my daughter into bed. She asked if we'd have to go back for Christmas. I told her no. Not unless we wanted to. She pulled the card from her nightstand and placed it gently under her pillow like it was something magical. I kissed her forehead and said, "You didn't do anything wrong, you know." She nodded sleepily. "I know," she whispered. "But it still hurt." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "That's the part we're going to change." Downstairs, my son was reviewing the second folder the lawyer had handed over. I didn't ask what was in it. I trusted him. Whatever it was, it didn't scare me. Not like it would have a few years ago. He looked up and said, "We're going to start shifting things slowly. No rush. But it's all there if you want it." I nodded. It was the first time I'd felt in control of my own life in a long time. And all it had taken was stepping away from a table that was never built for me to begin with. Ivy texted her mother late that night. I didn't read the message, but I heard the chime, and I saw her take a long breath before she hit send. She stayed with us for 3 more days. Helped decorate cookies with my daughter. sat on the couch and asked questions about how I met my husband, what it was like before everything changed. She said, "You used to laugh more, didn't you?" And I smiled and said, "Yes. I think I'm about to again." A week later, a package arrived. No return address. Just a brown paper box. Inside was the place card from Thanksgiving. The one that read "Family Help." Someone had scribbled out the words in black ink. Below it, in a different pen, someone had written my name. Not Mom. Not wife. My actual name. I held it for a long time before dropping it into the trash without a second thought. Christmas came and went. Quietly. We didn't decorate much, didn't host anyone. My daughter picked out one gift each for me and her brother. We made pancakes and watched old cartoons. No matching sweaters. No performative dinners. Just the three of us, warm and safe. Ivy came over again and stayed until New Year's. She didn't ask to go back. Her parents didn't push. Maybe they were embarrassed. Or maybe they were starting to see what it felt like to be ignored. I don't know if I'll ever get an apology from my husband. But I've stopped expecting one. He tried calling once. Left a voicemail that said, "We should talk." But it didn't sound like a man who wanted to understand. It sounded like someone who'd lost control and wanted it back. I didn't call him. I didn't need to. The only voice I needed to hear was my own, and I was finally listening to it. One night, my daughter and I sat on the porch under a thick quilt. She looked up at the stars and said, "I hope next year is like this one." I asked her what she meant. "Not the sad parts," she said. "The brave parts." I kissed the top of her head and whispered, "Me too." That house we left behind still stands. Still holds its dinners and birthday parties. Still sets its table like the seating chart is a declaration of worth. But we don't sit there anymore. We built our own. It's smaller. Quieter. But it's ours. And every name card at our table is handwritten with care. No titles. No labels. Just love. And when people ask what changed, I don't tell them it started with a lawyer or a speech or a folded card. I tell them it started the moment my daughter looked at me with hurt in her eyes and I finally decided not to let her carry mine too. That was the real beginning. Everything else was just the beautiful, necessary fallout.